Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
She blinded me with science. Yes, it's science and the law intersecting on the radio this morning here on CL 650. It's the Law Show with John Lakes and John White from LakesWhyteLLP, a North Vancouver law firm experienced in the estate law and estate planning activity and litigation as well. We're talking about children's rights, the hot new topic of reproductive technology, thus the blinding with science music, and also, and how the law struggles to keep up with all of this. Here's an interesting story. This actually comes to us from another province, but I'm curious as how it would apply in British Columbia. This is all over the news, and everyone will remember this. And if not this story, you've heard others like it. This happens in Winnipeg, right? The Manitoba government wants the feds to look at the case of two guys in their province who were switched at birth. You see, they learned the switch happened at a federally run hospital in a little town called Norway House in Manitoba. The men grew up together and always felt like they belonged in each other's family. So they finally decided to do something about it as adults. So they had DNA tests, and by George, if it didn't turn out to be that those emotions that they had all those years growing up turned out to have some foundation. They were switched at birth. They belonged to each other's family. They're grown-ups now. So, John White, you're the courtroom guy. You're going to, first of all, let's just move this from Manitoba to British Columbia, and sooner or later, somebody's going to die, and somebody's going to qualify to inherit something, but these people got switched at birth. Who's eligible for what here?
Well, that sounds like a good old-fashioned mess.
Certainly does.
So imagine that son one, let's call him Bob, and he's the birth child of Bill and Carol, but instead he's switched at birth, and he grows up with his parents being, as far as he knows, being Ted and Alice.
Right.
And let's say Joe is the birth child of Ted and Alice, but winds up
with the other two,
growing up with Bill and Carol.
Right.
What's going to happen? Well, assuming that neither of them was adopted, and from what you said, there's no reason to believe that either would have been adopted, because nobody knew.
That's right.
Nobody knew to bring on an adoption application, so there probably isn't an adoption here. So you've got Joe, who grew up believing Bill and Carol to be his parents, but Joe's rights as a child are going to be to inherit from Ted and Alice.
It's all about biology,
then, right? It's all about biology.
Interesting.
There's
so
no adoption.
Science trumps the human circumstances here.
Yeah, well, I mean, this part of it isn't so much science, but this is why it's a mess, because that's probably not what Joe was expecting. And especially if Bill and Carol are substantially better off than Ted and Alice are.
Right.
And if there's no will that specifically names Joe, Joe's got a problem. And similarly, if you look at Bob, he's the birth child of Bill and Carol, the wealthy couple, grows up poor with Ted and Alice.
Right.
If assuming that Bill and Carol don't have a will that names him, or he may well have rights to the estate of Bill and Carol, which would be a big windfall for him.
Oh, okay. So
it's a mess.
This is still playing out. We don't have any results, any final decisions on this one at all. But boy, what a colorful case to watch.
It sure could be.
Well, I think it could even be worse though, because let's say one of them has found this out when they've already inherited money from their father.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that's actually a void inheritance? He has to pay the money back?
Good question.
So it's, and again, it goes back to here's people that appear on the birth registration as the parents, but they're not actually the parents. So now if we were advising the mother, for example, what she should do is either she should do a legal adoption and let the other people adopt her,
even if these people are obviously very adults and so on,
or else do a will you can do adult adoptions.
Okay,
it does happen. So, or else you could do your will to try to accommodate this mess. But I don't, as I say, it happens every now and then. You hear stories of it happening, and it's going to happen again.
I didn't know, for example, you could do adult adoptions. I just always assumed that was a kid thing that sort of ended maybe at age 19.
No, so I haven't done. I've done a couple, and in both circumstances, it was something that a child had been raised by his mother and stepfather, but as long as his natural father was alive, they always refused to. He would refuse to sign the adoption, and it was only when the natural father died that they went through the adoption. So then they didn't have to get the consent of the birth father to the adoption.
In which case, it would have been well worth the wait, right? And no harm, no foul in the waiting time.
Well, I think in one case the guy actually inherited too. So that's.
But
anyway, there's always stories out there.
Right, and we've been talking and alluding to the whole matter of reproductive technology and how the law, even though we've just had this WESA upgrade or update to BC estate law in the last year or so, the Wills, Estates and Succession Act, the law is always struggling to keep up with technology and science. It's the nature of progression, isn't it? So, John, when we talk about all of these issues surrounding sperm and embryos, and which now can be frozen for. I'm assuming, John White, you would know more about this. Is it an indefinite period of time? Can an embryo be basically suspended for any number of years?
I imagine they haven't tested that yet. For the purposes of the law, it's got to be 2 years.
Okay.
But the way that WESA has now been rewritten or written to accommodate this new idea, they talk about timelines of 2 years, which I expect is well within the time during which an embryo can be frozen or otherwise preserved and remain viable.
Right, and of course now, John, and this we're getting into family divorce law here, but this is where the law and science are going, because now you hear of celebrity and other marital breakups and so on, and not only is there the house, the car, the cottage, and whatever, there's the frozen reproductive bits, and all of a sudden now there's a big scrap over who gets that, and judges are having to go places again they never would have imagined having to go.
Well, right now there's a court case involving Sofia Vergara.
All right, sure.
From Modern Family.
Who just got married a few days ago.
And
right.
It's in the press right now, and she and her former boyfriend, Nick Loeb, are battling over frozen fertilized embryos.
Okay.
And that is...
As in who they belong to,
well,
John?
I think the issue is that I think she takes a position. She wants to have them destroyed.
Right.
Because her relationship with Mr. Loeb is finished, and Mr. Loeb's position is that he treats these as his children, and he should have the right to, I guess they'd have to be conceived in another woman's, or plant another woman's womb.
Exactly, right.
But it's one of these things that the courts really don't know what to do with it.
I can well imagine that.
And you get into all these other issues as to the rights of the woman, and the rights of the father, and the rights of this unborn embryo. So this one's going to be quite an interesting result to see what happens, because even though it happens in California, it could have ramifications throughout North America.
Oh, it absolutely should. And then court guys like you, especially John White, watch cases like this. Watch the big, and I know it's a celebrity thing, but you're not worried about the celebrity aspect. You're worried about the legal decision that's going to come out here that could very, very, in one case, very quickly change the way the law is approached in this regard.
Well, I mean, we don't take too many cues from the legal decisions made in the state of California.
Of course not.
But, it's like many sorts of trends. It might start in California, but it finds its way up here eventually.
So have you involved in court cases here in British Columbia with any of these frozen embryos or frozen sperm or as assets from an estate that are distributed that are disputed as to where they're going to go?
I haven't seen that one yet, but it's only a matter of time. WESA provides some rules for what to do with frozen embryos or frozen sperm, what they call human reproductive material.
Okay.
And it is possible now, and it didn't used to be, for a child to be conceived after the death of the will maker through the use of human reproductive material, and if certain notice requirements and certain timelines are respected, that child born what's getting to be a long time after the death of the will maker can have standing to challenge the will maker's will, or to be considered a child of the will maker for all the purposes we talked about earlier in this show.
Wow. So you're anticipating a person who's not here yet, but that person somehow or another is going to be included in the benefits of the estate. We'll find out how that gets. I need to take a quick break. We must find out how to get. Now we're on the cutting edge. It's a little sharp, but relax. We're gonna tell you how this all shakes down and how the law in British Columbia and everywhere in Canada is attempting as best it can to accommodate all of these changes and the people it affects. Back with more after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.